What's good, dudes and dudettes? Welcome to Just a Dude Podcast, the spot where we keep it real, dig into life's wild stuff, and maybe crack a few beers or coffees. No judgment. I'm your host, Nathan, just a dude trying to figure it all out, and today we're going big. We've got a guest who's been through the storm, come out swinging, and somehow made it hilarious along the way. Mental health, comedy, raw stories. This episode's got it all. So kick back, turn it up, and let's get into it. You're not going to want to miss this one. Trust me. All right, dudes and dudettes, let me set the stage for our guest today, Dave Mowry. This guy's not just a dude, he's the dude when it comes to mixing mental health with a mic drop. He's the author of the OMG That's Me books. Yep, you can snag those on Amazon, where he spills the tea on living with bipolar disorder, and trust me, it's real and it's funny. He's taught stand-up comedy to folks battling mental illness, worked with the NAMI to spread the word, and basically turned life's curveballs into punchlines. Dave's here to drop some wisdom, some laughs, and maybe a few "did that really happen" moments. Dude's a legend. Let's give it up for Dave Mowry. Dave, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have you here. And I want to start things off a little easy just to get to know you a little bit, Dave, and for the audience to get to know you. But you're known as the guy who mixes mental health and comedy. And how does a dude even end up on that path?
Interesting question. Who would have ever thought I'd be here? I never did. It just kind of happened. A stand-up comic came down here. I live in the Portland area, and he teaches stand-up comedy to folks with mental illness. I took the class. I just took the class, I don't know why, and found out that I could write jokes and I had a good sense of humor. And if I thought something was funny, other people did too. So, and I just took my darkest days, my hardest experiences, and looked for the humor in them and wrote jokes. And that's kind of how it happened. And then now I, of course, teach stand-up comedy to folks with a mental illness.
Yeah.
As well as doing other things.
Yeah, and you stumbled into kind of writing and teaching comedy, right? From this, and it all spanned from this class that you took?
Yeah, well, actually, when I went into the psychiatric unit at the hospital, St. Vincent's Hospital in Portland, I think it was 96. And when I got in there, the anxiety was overwhelming. I was in a bad shape. I mean, I was in bad shape. But once I got in the hospital, no phones ringing, nobody knocking on the door, only people that could see me were the people that I wanted to see me. And, the stress and the anxiety kind of lifted, and I came up with some jokes. Just simple jokes. Like, do you know why they keep the doors locked to the psychiatric unit?
Why is that?
Because there's so many people trying to get in.
That's true. And that kind of reminds me of the joke of why do they keep fences around graveyards? Because people are dying to get in.
That's right. Yeah.
Exactly. But that's a good thing because that probably helped lift your mental state, right? By writing these jokes and having a little laugh.
Definitely. And taking the class, I thought, I can do that. I did it before with, silly little jokes. So yeah, going into your darkest days and your hardest times. I mean, for me, I had a pretty severe case of PTSD from, all my challenging life experiences. And I'd be driving down the road and hear a song on the radio, and it would trigger a memory of one of those dark days, or those, and I'd go back and relive it, and it was just awful. And then it had happened 5, 6, 7 times a day, different triggers and different things.
Yep.
But when I did the stand-up comedy, and since then, if I get triggered, if something reminds me of something, I'll say, where can I find the humor in that? Look to find a humor, maybe come up with a punchline or a setup or something. And, the PTSD is gone. We talk about creating pathways in our brain, neuroplasticity, creating new pathways in our brain.
Yeah.
And with me, when I everything was negative, I had the negative loop, but the constant negative thoughts and anxiety and all that kind of stuff. And then when I get triggered, I go to that dark place.
Mm-hmm.
But after the comedy, looking for the humor and finding humor in that experience created new pathways in my brain. And so that's where I go. I don't go to that dark place and relive it and have another panic attack or whatever. I just don't do that anymore. It's the difference is huge. I can't. And I've seen the same thing happen with other people that I teach in the classes. The same thing happens with them.
Yeah, I can imagine because just, sometimes just you could be down on a day and we're just talking, we'll talk normal folks, right? Just a normal day for what we call a normal folk, but when you hear a joke, sometimes that can just lift your spirits, just one little stupid, and I don't want to say stupid joke, but, one little simple joke, right? It can just change the whole trajectory of your day. And being as someone like myself who, I suffer from PTSD because
Hmm.
I spent 13 years in law enforcement. I was an EMT, 911 dispatcher, you name it. Obviously I had a problem with my mental health and wanted to 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 make it go as negative as possible with all my life choices. But I get it because comedy is such a thing that I think everyone can relate to, and everybody's comedy is a little bit different, right? What we find funny, but everybody finds something funny, and going into a comedic line and taking a dark experience and lifting it up through laughter it's such a great idea. And one of the reasons, Dave, like I said before we started talking, I wanted to have you on the show because if we can find alternate ways to help our mental health and anyone's mental health really without using, a ton of drugs and a ton of different this is just another thing that someone can use to help themselves individually, right?
Yeah, and you don't have to be seriously mentally ill. You're talking about regular folk and just life, and things happen. I don't know what it'd be. I'd be tripping on the steps coming up to the door, and smacking your elbow and having a bad day. And if looking for some kind of humor, changes everything. And hearing a simple joke, if it's funny, and like I said, my humor, if I think something's funny, other people do too. I don't find everything funny and all that, but if I think something's funny, other people do too. So I can tell a joke, and it's pretty easy. But yeah, just a simple joke. And when we laugh, it releases endorphins.
Yes.
It feels good. And so after that, I relate. It's almost like having sex. You have sex and the stress is gone, the anxiety
Yep.
is gone. You just,
You get that moment of clarity right afterwards, right?
yeah, exactly. And the same thing with humor. You just, especially if you get a good belly laugh, it clears out a lot of that stuff, and, gives us some peace of mind. And I remember the first time I laughed, from 96 to 2010 were my dark days, my lost years. I had mental illness all my adult life, but that's when it was bad, my lost years. I remember the first time, uh, I remember hearing something, doing something, and having a belly laugh. I mean, a real laugh, and at that moment I realized how long it had been since I laughed. It'd been years and years and years, and it felt so good. It was so amazing. So yeah, laughter is awesome. It makes it's really good for us.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the power of humor is just amazing. And the fact that, I want to go into this too, Dave, is that you teach stand-up comedy to people with mental illness. And that's seriously next level because it's something you wouldn't think. I would think of seeing a stand-up comedy class, right? But not necessarily for folks with mental illness. And so how did that, obviously you went to a class, but how did you embrace that? And, how does cracking jokes help with, when life's throwing us punches?
Yeah, I kind of slid into it when I was taking the class. I wrote jokes. I found out I could write jokes, and again, my humor thing. And so I wrote jokes for a lot of other people in the class. And then at the end of the class, we performed, which was great. And but the people that were in the class wanted to continue, so we continued. And so I was leading that group. And then it ended up I started teaching classes for folks with a mental illness. The thing with mental illness, if somebody comes in and their life's been great and they haven't had any hard times or any issues, they don't have much material for humor, comedy.
Right.
Your comedy comes from the more challenges you have, the more material you have. So when you're talking about teaching stand-up comedy to folks with mental illness, there's lots of material, and it's
Yeah, I
really
can tell
important.
just from my own, my own issues. There's a lot of sometimes dark comedy in there, but it's there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely there. And so these folks have had lots of challenges, lots of material for jokes. I taught a class at the Oregon State Hospital to folks who are incarcerated and they were in there, sent to prison and went to the psych unit. So it was, they're criminally mentally ill. And so I taught a class down there and, lots of material. Lots of material.
Yeah,
So
I'm sure.
teaching the class, and some people think when their vision of someone with a mental illness, they think somebody that's catatonic or
Exactly.
whatever, and
And
that's not it.
I think that's the stigma that we're still seeing today, Dave, too, is that even though we talk about mental health a little bit more, a lot of people have that vision of, I don't know, the awakening where, with, I forget what the name of was it Dustin Hoffman, where he's drooling and, and it's like, I think that's what it was called. But, people have that view or that you're mentally ill and you're going to hurt people and you're going to do this. And it's like, that has really nothing to do with it in most cases.
That's right. In most cases, people with mental illness generally are they're not violent. They're not, they're just regular folks. And we just have, challenges and mental health challenges. But the stigma is real. People, we've got a severe homeless problem here in Portland, and a lot of the folks are mentally ill. And so that's a vision that a lot of people have. But it's all only a small percentage of the folks. I mean, people live with anxiety or they live with depression or, PTSD or panic attacks or, in my case, bipolar disorder, which is more severe. It's not, these are bright people, they're strong people, they're able people, and we just go through. And what's great about it is when we start, we go through and we talk about, we kind of tell our own story. So we talk about it's kind of like almost like a group therapy in that we're telling our story. But while we're doing that, we're looking for humor. And so it's just a 180 from what you'd normally get in a support group.
Yeah, absolutely. That's not, generally when you're in a support group, you talk, and go around the circle, right? And
Yep.
then just say your bit and then you go on. But this is a great case because not only are you sharing those stories, which helps in, with mental health issues, especially like PTSD. I've found that the more I talk about it, the better it gets. But you're also looking for the humor in there, which actually adds another step to say, okay, we looked at my life. Now we can maybe laugh at it a little bit together.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it makes it so your experiences aren't necessarily sadness. There's some loss. There's always some loss. And it makes it so it's not failure. It's none of those things. It's like, okay, I have mental illness and I've got these experiences. Hey, that's lots of, like I said, lots of material for humor. The transformation from when somebody comes in and starts the class to the 8 weeks that were of the class, you see the transformation with folks. And a lot of them, they have their psychiatric challenges and their experiences. And I had this one guy, Michael, who his mom brought him to class, and he was an adult, but his mom brought him to class. It was 60 miles each way.
Wow.
And when he came to the class, he whispered. He couldn't speak above a whisper. He just hadn't for years and years and years. And so he took the class and he told his story in a whisper, something about it. And then over time, we found humor in his experiences. He liked his jokes, which is one thing about the classes. We like our jokes and the comics like their jokes because they're based in reality. And then we look for the creative part, the humor in it.
Yep.
But Michael, after about the fourth class, I had him go home and go into the bathroom and look in the mirror and tell his jokes and tell them as loud as he could, And if he thought he was too loud, he was doing just right. And the next week he came up and he was talking a little bit louder. And then the next week I had him go into the garage and yell at the top of his lungs, yell his jokes as loud as he could. And he did it and he came back and he was talking. He ended up talking in a regular voice. He ended up getting on stage and performing his set and being out there. And he just did a great job as, performing his act. That transformation, he could have lived his life whispering and whatever that was from inside of him. Not anymore. He took the class. Now he talks in a regular. He does open mic nights where he lives. So he's, I see that's a change in him, but I see a change in everybody that comes through the class.
Yeah, and that was going to be one of my next questions, Dave, was how people been receptive to it, and have you seen changes, which obviously I think we know you've seen changes that are made in people as they come through your class.
Yeah, exactly. See the changes, see the growth, see the finding the humor in their experiences, and it changes everything. Instead of this darkness or this loss or whatever, when they think of it like with the PTSD type thing, then they think of the joke, or they think of writing a joke, or where's the humor in that? And it just changes everything
Yeah, really your
for
whole
folks.
outlook, right?
Yeah.
Because instead of focusing on the negative, you're saying, once you feel that negative, you're saying, hold on a second, I know I can find something funny about this. And so now instead of focusing on the negative and going down that, that dark rabbit hole that we sometimes go through, you're hopefully picking up your spirits a little bit and getting out of that funk.
Yeah. And important to know, we don't make fun of ourselves. We don't make fun of other people. We tell our story one joke at a time. And then oftentimes, people haven't told their story, haven't really told their story. And here they are in a group with other folks living with mental health challenges. And it's a comedy class and whatever, it just gets, people tend to really open up and
Yeah.
really tell their story, sometimes for the first time. And so we take that and we take the reality. Part of joke writing is the joke is based in reality. I've got a suicide joke, it's a gentle suicide joke. So, but I had a time during my dark days where I thought about ending my life, and I went on to a little park and sat on a park bench, and I had the gun in my lap, and there was a river, and I didn't, you know, I
Hmm.
didn't, but I came up with a suicide joke. And so the suicide joke is when things, it's based in reality. I mean, I
Yeah.
had that reality. So when things were really bad and really dark, I decided to end it all. So I went up into the bathroom and took a bunch of pills. And afterwards, I called my wife for help. She said there are more pills under the sink.
And that's the kind of humor that gets me too, because that is funny. You're thinking, wait, what is she gonna say? And then, oh, there's more under.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Where's the blood, the gun, the guts, and all that kind of,
Yep.
no, yeah. And she was very helpful, and
Yep.
that's the creative
Exactly.
part, so the reality is, the suicidal ideation, the being on the place. So, yeah, I had that dark days and I contemplated suicide and really hard times. But then, so there's the reality, and there's where the setup comes, and then the
Yeah.
creative part, the fun part comes in the punchline. And when people find a punchline in their story, especially in their darkest time, their hardest time, you can see their eyes brighten up and the smile in their face, and just,
It's
and
it's
this
almost like a complete facial change, right?
complete, it is
Yeah.
complete body language, facial change. And the folks in the class, we like our jokes. I think that's one of the most important things is we like our jokes. And people will come to the class and they'll say, okay, I'm going to take the class, but I'm never going to get up on stage and perform. It's just not going to happen. I'm not going to go there. And I say, okay, no problem. And then we go through the class and we find humor in their hard times and their challenges, and they like their jokes. Everybody gets up at stage and performs. I've never had anybody say, okay, that was great, but I'm not going to get up there. And so even the person that said, I'm never going to get up there and perform, they like their jokes. They think they're funny, and they are funny. And so they get up on stage and they tell their jokes and people laugh. And then they come back off the stage, and the first thing they say to me is, when can I do it again?
That's a great experience, because that's something when they started the class, like you said, they're like, there's no way I'm getting up on stage. And now they're saying, I mean, a complete 180, right? They're saying, "Hey, I had a great time. I feel good. I want to do this again." And that's amazing. I mean, that's a testament to you and the fact. And I want to say, you, because you're leading the class, but also to how you involve everyone else to get that support in the group is fantastic, because it's not just you and the other person, but you're all working collectively together.
We are, and it's healing for everybody. Say we're working with Michael, as an example, and he'll be talking about something. I'll I'll see an opportunity for humor in the story, so I'll get that, and so we'll start talking about that, and other people in the class will come up with ideas and thoughts. things. And so it's a collaborative thing. So everybody else is getting the benefit also
Yes.
of doing it. And it's, it's kind of like group therapy in a sense, except it's fun and it's creative. And, yeah, it's truly amazing what happens. I'm lucky to be able to be in that situation. It makes a difference in people's lives. And when we get up, we performed in front of hundreds of people and never bombed, never bombed.
That's
And
awesome.
and the people and the comics, these are, again, folks who came in oftentimes with serious mental illness and, serious depression. Molly, her mom brought her as well because Molly didn't drive and she was a doctor. And then she had to quit being a doctor because of her bipolar disorder. So she
Wow.
lost her identity. She'd lost
Yes, so
everything.
much time she put into becoming a doctor and then have that just come and take it all away.
Yeah, she lost everything. And we found humor. We found it changed everything. Molly performs around town and she's busy and active and whatnot. But when people go up on stage, they're not nervous because they like their jokes.
That's awesome because especially if you're helping people with any type of anxiety and they can get up on stage, that is a huge step.
It
Huge
is.
step,
It is.
you know? And so Dave, I know you write jokes and you have the class, but you write other things too, don't you? Like OMG, that's me.
Yeah, I wrote the OMG That's Me book and OMG That's Me 3. But we skipped OMG That's Me 2. So that's another story. But OMG That's Me, it's about my life with bipolar disorder. And I was asked to blog for bphope.com, which is BP is bipolar. So they had a magazine and a blog. And the blog is huge. It's really, it's huge. It's probably the biggest mental health blog. Anyway, I was asked to blog for them. Most of the blog posts that they were getting were kind of how to, like 3 steps to doing better in the morning if you have depression or, this or that. And what I wrote was I went back to an experience, say with my anxiety or with my mania, and I went back to that spot and was there, and I wrote about that experience. And so it wasn't a how to, it was just, about the experience. And what happened was people that read the posts, um, said, OMG, that's me. You're telling my story. I don't feel so alone now. I thought I was the only one. And so I wrote the blog posts and been read by over 1 million people. And with the most common comment being, OMG, that's me.
Hence the name, right?
Yeah, hence the name, and it worked out. It's a good name. It's catchy. So I took some of the best blog posts, most read, most responded to, and compiled them in the book. So, and self-publishing a book, you usually sell 50 copies to family and friends, and then it goes into the wherever it goes and whatnot. But OMG, that's me, self-published, and um, sold almost 20,000 copies to date.
Wow.
It's
Yeah,
big.
that's it. I call that a successful book. It's funny, Dave, because I had a publisher on a couple of weeks ago, and he said if you sell 5,000 books in the entire run, of your book, you've done a great job. And to hear that you did 20,000, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's and that's because it's relatable. People read it, and it's like you're telling my story, and it's different. It's not a how to. It's not a what if. It's not a it's the actual experience, and people relating to it because they have that experience too, or similar experience. And somebody else has it, and it's okay, and it happens, and you can get through it too. And I
Yeah,
think
because
that's an important message is, no matter how dark it is and whatnot, you can come out the other end.
yeah, I agree with you. And to see someone else, in reading something to see, hey, here's someone else that experienced something like me, and they're doing something successful or whatever that person may be doing, just in general terms. But because every time I think a lot of us get stuck down to, oh, why is this happening to me? I must be the only one this is happening to. It's never happened before. But in reality, there's tons of people out there who have probably experienced similar situations. And so you're not alone.
That's right. You're not alone. And one of the things you said, people, you get stuck in that situation where you feel like you're alone and you're going through these things. And one of the important parts of my life, one of my keys to my life is never getting stuck. I never, ever wanted to get stuck. I mean, it was as I just don't get stuck. And so I've got, and some people get kind of stuck on the music that they heard when they were in high school or college, or
Right.
they get in this focus and they get stuck on that, or this group of friends and get stuck with that and not expand. But it's important. I just don't get stuck. And that's a big thing for me. And I try to share that with other people because
Yeah. I was going to ask you, Dave, is there any steps or things that you could share on, what you do? Obviously, it may not work for everybody, but maybe some examples of how people can, prevent themselves from getting stuck.
I think the thing that's really important, a key for me to life is to every day to look to do something nice for somebody. So when we just in our day to day, could be our spouse, which it's a good way if you can do that. If you and your spouse can do that, look to do something nice for the other person every day. It really helps with the relationship and the challenges because you get out of your head. And that's the thing is when you look to do something nice for somebody, you get out of your head. And so you're say you've got those racing thoughts or these negative thoughts or whatever, and you've got them. But if you're looking to do something nice for somebody, you get out of your head. And when you do something nice for somebody, obviously,
Yeah.
it
And you know how
it
simple that
feels
is to
good.
just, yeah, to how simple of an object that or a process to just go out and do something nice for somebody. It can be so simple and so easy to do. And you're right. It can totally change the outcome of your day and their day.
Yeah, and their day. So and sometimes people pass it on. And there's all sorts of opportunities. And you're right, it could be the smallest thing. I mean, just the smallest thing. But it feels good. You make a difference in somebody else's life and it gets us out of our head. So that's something that's important. When I was going through, gosh, I don't want to get sad. My dark days, my wife and I and the kids were homeless for 18 months and we were couch surfing and doing those things. But in the dark days, a couple things when it was everything I could do to get out of bed and get into the couch, just to be, just to hold it, just to be, just to exist, just to live, just to be. I turned on the cooking channel. And so I watched the cooking channel. I was doing something without doing anything. I was just sitting there. So I'd watch the cooking channel and there was something. I mean, it was food and I didn't cook the recipes, but I learned what spices went with what thing and all that kind of stuff. And so, and yeah, sometimes I'd get up and cook and do something. So watching the cooking channel was something. Otherwise you can get down in that situation down to the couch and just sit
Yeah.
and just dwell and have the negative thoughts. Now, that's the thing about the negative thoughts, just to go round and round and round in your head. And it's so
Yep.
hard to get them
Yeah,
out.
and if you don't break that cycle, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse.
It,
I know from from experience. But Dave, when you did this writing, what was that like for you to put everything out there for the world to see? Because essentially, you wrote originally for the blog that gets millions of views, and then you took these and wrote them in a book. So, I mean, that's really putting yourself out there. So, what was it like to do that for you?
I did it for the right reasons, so it was okay.
Hmm.
I was telling my story. It was like 800 words at a time or so, but I didn't make it about me. So it was about the experiences, it was about the life, it was about the feelings and whatnot, but it wasn't about me. So it was okay. And that's one of the things that I've found, it's important to do things. If I do things for the right reasons, it works out. If I do it for me or to be read or to be respected or to be smart or to sell books or whatever, those are all the wrong reasons.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I did it for the right reasons. And sometimes it was hard, but, my acquaintances, my people that were around me didn't read bphope.com. So it was like,
Yeah, you were kind of writing. Nobody knew about it in your inner circle, but the people in your external circle, they were
yeah,
definitely digging it.
yeah, exactly. So I was, in a sense, I was anonymous. I was out
Yeah.
there and for the world, but it was still anonymous. It wasn't me coming out per se.
Yeah, Was there ever a time in your writing where you're just like, "Oh, crap, did I just overshare that?" Or is that maybe something I should have kept to myself? Did you have those thoughts too?
Yeah, I usually I was able to get it out, and I wrote one blog about oversharing
Mhm.
because folks with mental illness, it's the most important thing going on in our life. It's consuming us. So I mean, it's just so when we get in a situation, social situation, sometimes we talk about it and we talk about. Oh God, I was depressed and, I couldn't put on my socks. And you're sitting here talking to somebody somewhere. And the last thing they want to hear is you talking about depression or this or that. And so, they end the conversation as soon as possible and wander away. And so you'd be standing there. So I wrote a blog post about oversharing and to not overshare. And
Mhm.
another really important piece of my life is smile, ask, and listen.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. And if you meet somebody, if you think to yourself, I think to myself, I like you. And so I look at them and I think I like you. And then I smile. And because I like you, I get that twinkle in my eyes. The smile is in my eyes and not just my mouth. And then, I ask something and listen to what they have to say and maybe ask again or, something and extend the conversation and I don't make it about me. And so maybe I don't say much. I just ask some questions and they talk. People like to talk about themselves. They like to be listened to, and they conversation ends and they say, it's been great to talk to you
Yeah.
because I'm listening to them and I'm asking them questions and I'm smiling and nodding, and I could do that. And, I share some things, but I don't say, oh, by the way, I got bipolar disorder and severe anxiety and I
Yeah,
almost
I don't
kill
think any of
myself.
us say, "Hey, here's my, my mental illness is on my sleeve here for you to see," right? Most of us usually will hold that back.
Well, that's just the folks with the mental illness there's a lot of people that tend to, since that's the biggest thing in their life, that's what they talk about. They may, and part of what I teach people is to, before they go to, say, a party or a function or a work or whatever it is, to think about what am I going to talk about? What do I have to talk about besides my mental illness?
Yeah.
And maybe it's a book they read or a movie they saw or a thought or something. And so, have that in mind. So, when you go to this event, you're talking to this person, you can talk about this book or this restaurant or this whatever. And so you don't go to that default talking about your mental
Right.
illness, the meds you
Yep.
take, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Especially on a first impression, that may not be the best conversation starter, right?
And it happens a lot. I mean, and, I run a mental health nonprofit here, and it happens a lot. Folks, especially folks that are in a hard spot and have had those lots of life challenges, and yeah, especially for them, they need to talk about it. They need to talk about it. And fortunately, where the mental health nonprofit, they're comfortable. It's a special place. They open up and they talk about it. And they're talking to people that understand and relate and accept them for who they are. And so they get that chance to talk about it.
Yeah, excellent. Dave, so you've been through the ringer with bipolar and you've come out the other side as we're seeing today. I'm sure it's still a struggle, but what is one piece of wisdom you would give to our listeners who might be struggling now? Is there one thing that you can go back to and say, this is what helped me, or maybe a piece of advice to say, hey, if you're struggling, go here, go there, whatever it may be.
Yeah, it's not just one thing. I think, there's some things that are really important. And one of the most important things is sleep, getting enough sleep. Most of us know if we don't get enough sleep, then you know, we're not doing well and our, mind goes different places and we're not at our best. Folks with mental illness, if we don't get enough sleep, it's bad. It's
Yeah.
bad.
And I
So
mean, really,
definitely,
if you think about it, Dave, even doctors will tell you not getting enough sleep is just bad for your general overall health too. So it makes
mhm.
sense that it's going to be even more detrimental to our mental health.
Yeah, and it definitely is. So make sure, getting enough sleep. And then, I mean, we're all in a different place, a different depth, a different, place with our mental illness. So, if all you can do is get to the couch and just sit to be, turn on the cooking channel,
Hmm.
do something without doing anything, and it's you're doing something, you're learning something, so you're accomplishing something. And so it's not just a waste of time, I guess,
Yeah.
is
Yeah,
the
not
thought on
just
that.
sitting there and being down in the dumps and focusing
Yeah.
on that. Hopefully get your mind off of it a little bit.
Yeah. And the other thing that worked for me is reading books because, again, I'd get out of my head. It was interesting. I read some self-help books and they were really depressing. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just like, that's really depressing. Again, getting stuck. I didn't want to get stuck. So I read Russian literature. I read Tolstoy. I also have dyslexia. So it takes a while. So I
Yeah,
had this
that definitely
500-page book.
it doesn't make your reading any easier, right?
No. So I had this 500-page book and I spent, maybe I only read 2 pages or maybe I read 10 or whatever it was. But, I read that. And so not reading a self-help book or, something simpler, too light, reading something
Yeah.
of
Like a nice
substance.
fictional book or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And so reading, I don't know, I got into Russian literature. It was awesome. So I read Solzhenitsyn, like I say, Crime and Punishment, all these Anna Karenina, and it was like an old friend. It was like
Yeah.
an old friend,
Yep. And
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 that
like you
helped.
said, it's a nice escape, right? From just constantly thinking about whatever may be going on in your head. Now you can start putting pictures in there as you read through your book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And then getting out if you can, just okay, so it's everything you can do to get out of bed and make it to the couch. And so you get there, you get downstairs, and you always sit in this one spot on the couch. Sit on a different spot, sit on a different chair, sit on a different couch, or whatever it is. Sit on the other end of the couch. Just,
Just something to change it up a little bit.
yeah, just something. And
Yeah.
so you're doing something. You're making a change. You're growing. You're recovering. And again, so it's and yeah, don't get stuck. I mean, it's so important, just, it gets better. I think, folks with bipolar disorder die 10 years, you know, be, before
Sooner
their
than
life
someone
expect
without.
sooner.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I made it past that. And so, it's I'm getting a bit off topic. Well, I don't know if it's off
No.
topic, but a different direction. It's if, for so long, and still, I had businesses. I was successful. We made a lot of money. I had a nice house, had nice cars, and all that kind of stuff. And then, I got sick and we lost it all. We lost our businesses. We were homeless. We were hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. There was I had to go through the stages of recovery, stages of grief. And I was pissed for so long. And still, I still think of some things and it just pisses me off.
It
It
just hits
pisses
that
me off.
trigger, right? You're just like, damn
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Things were so good. I mean, because bipolar, you've got your ups, your downs, and then
Hmm.
your normal times, and the ups, it felt great for a while and then it went too far. And I started businesses and things and spending money, investing money in things. And that's where we ended up out of, in trouble.
Yeah.
Um, and so I was pissed. I was pissed because when I was good and I was healthy, success, good things were happening. And then, we lost it all and we had our challenges. We still have our challenges. And
Yeah.
it pisses me off. And it's only
Yeah.
been recent.
I'm
Good.
sure it does. No, I'm just going to say it. I'm sure it does because there's been even some things in my life where I've had issues like that too, where maybe spending money to try to make myself feel better, right? And getting into more debt because of that. And then realizing once you get that material thing, doesn't really change anything, does it? So
No,
we're just trying to cope or compensate for something else, I think, in some of those instances. And it makes it difficult. And you do, like you said, you get pissed, especially when you look back and sometimes look at some of the decisions you made and you're just like, why? I would never do that,
exactly. We look back and we see this and, yeah, I get pissed. And it took me a long time to accept my situation, my state, my mental health. I remember being in the hospital when I was in the psych unit, looking around and thinking, okay, I'm here and this is all great and good, but that's not me. I'd look at the other people and that's
Hmm.
not me. And then I'd be in other situations and there were folks with mental challenges, and, that's not me. And one of the things I did when I was getting better was I went back to school, to college. I went back to Portland State. I'd have panic attacks often, every other day, every day. I'd be in a class and I'd sit back in the back corner. I'd have a wall on my right side and a wall behind me, and the person in front of me had the back of their head.
Mm-hmm.
The only person I was really exposed to was the guy next to me on the left. I never looked to the left. But I was okay being there and being anonymous. But then we'd break into small groups.
Yeah.
And the first time that happened, I went and I sat with the group and immediately had a panic attack. And when I talk panic attack, it's like sweat pouring off my face and my forehead. I soaked the collar of my shirt and my underarms and the back of my shirt. I mean, it's
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. My vision goes, my voice goes. I mean, it's just bad. So I escaped to the bathroom, sat in the bathroom until the class was over, and then snuck back in and got my backpack. But that would happen fairly often. Going back to school, getting my degree was one of the hardest things I did. But one day I was sitting out, I'd had a bad panic attack, and my wife was picking me up. I usually rode the bus, but that day she was picking me up, and I went out in front to wait for her, and I sat down on the sidewalk and leaned my back against the building, and I was just done. I mean, I was just done, and she was running late, and so she was late, and I knew that if she didn't come, I wasn't getting up. I was just done. I wasn't getting up.
It had taken its toll on you for sure, right?
Yeah. And we were driving home, and we drove through Portland Old Town, and there were folks who were living on the street or living in single room occupancy apartments, and they were sitting on the sidewalk and and that's when I was like, oh my God, that could be me.
Yeah.
That's when I finally accepted the fact that finally truly accepted the fact that I've got a serious mental illness, and that's when I finally accepted it.
Yeah. And I think that's the hardest thing for any of us. And whether it be a mental illness or, folks with addiction, is that acceptance, accepting that it is, I don't want to say unfortunately, but it is part of us, right?
Yeah.
That thing, whatever it is. So if we want to make it better, we're going to have to do some work on it. We can't just let it dominate our lives.
Yeah. Yeah. And, my wife stayed with me when we lost everything. She stayed with me, she's a hero of my story, really, because if she wouldn't have, I would have been in a single room occupancy apartment in Old Town, hotel in Old Town.
Yeah, like one of the folks that you talked about.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be me. But
it's a good thing that she stuck around and she's still with you today. I have to assume. I thought I saw someone walk behind you, but yeah, it was, I know. No, it's fantastic because I'm the same way. I don't know where I would be today if it wasn't for my wife standing by my side and doing things, and you're right. Having a good companion really, really does help.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah.
I think people ask me, why did she stay with you? And I think, when we got married, she didn't marry me, because I was successful,
right.
at the time. So we got married for the right reasons.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Dave, was that obviously you guys got married for the right reasons.
Yeah. So we stuck together through the hard times, and she's had her hard times, and I've been there for her, of course. But that's what happens when you get married for the right reasons and when you look to do something nice for each other every day.
Yeah. Hey, when I took those vows, right, for sickness and in health and death do us part.
That's right.
So, I stick by that today. So I don't know why she still sticks by me, but that's a whole different story.
Sure. And one of the things about bipolar is the mania, and when you're manic, oftentimes it's usual to have sexual ideation, And for me, I knew I was going manic. Well, it's interesting. I've got a joke. I talked about, I finally, after years, I figured out how I could tell the difference between when I was depressed and when I was manic, because when I was depressed, it was everything I could do just to get out of bed. And when I was manic, it was everything I could do to get my wife into bed.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, that's a big difference.
Yeah, it's a big difference. Yeah.
A big difference between the two.
Yeah, and I was really inept. I mean, I was, And when you're manic, you take risks and you do things. And so I thought about affairs, and I flirted with people and all that kind of stuff. But fortunately, I was really inept at it.
Yeah, good. Yeah, that's a good thing.
So I ended up
Definitely
faithful.
not being a ladies' man helped you, right?
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah, I'm the
being,
same way. So nothing would. I don't think that would help me either. But that's funny.
yeah, and nothing like being manic and having, whatever, and being mentally ill to turn
Yeah,
turn turn the women off. You know,
exactly. Yeah, that's not the top of their dateable list, right?
no, definitely not the top of their dateable
No.
list.
Oh my
So
goodness, that is funny though. Dave, I did want to talk just briefly, but you did say you're running a nonprofit, right, for mental health. I just wanted to see if you wanted to plug that a little bit and give the listeners a little bit of information about it.
sure, it's I'm not. NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness, is the largest grassroots mental health organization in the country, and they have affiliates in different places. Obviously, 800 affiliates, and so I run one of those. We've got 22 support groups. We work with about 700 people a month that come into the building. So it's NAMI. I think NAMI is ours is a special place because everybody that works there has lived experience with mental illness, and we have great support groups, great facilitators. And it was funny, some of the facilitators would talk more than listen. So when I
Yeah,
got there and I saw that, I had a meeting, and I told them about the acronym WAIT, WAIT, and it stands for Why Am I Talking? So, as a facilitator, if you're
yeah.
talking, take a moment and think, why am I talking? And if you're talking for yourself, about yourself, then,
It's time to stop and switch
it's time
gears,
to
right?
stop. Just stop talking. But it's a special place. So, yeah, NAMI. And there's affiliates everywhere. If NAMI has made a huge difference in my life, my wife had me go to a NAMI affiliate or a NAMI meeting 2009 or whatever it was. And I just, again, sat in the back quiet, but they just let me be. And I
Yeah,
felt safe there. And so I went back, and they remembered my name. But again, they didn't ask anything from me. They just let me be. And
let you wait until you were ready.
yeah. And over time, it just helped me heal. So NAMI is a special place.
Yeah, and with NAMI, Dave, is that something where people could, look up the website and maybe find a meeting in their area? And then is there costs to those meetings?
Everything's free. There's no charge for anything at NAMI. And yeah, there's local affiliates. You can go online and you can go to NAMI.com, which is the national organization, plug in where you live, and it'll tell you the closest affiliate. And depending on the affiliate, they're all a little bit different. But yeah, they've all got support and advocacy, and, they do some education. So it's a great place. And if, what happens with us at our place, which I'm really proud of, is folks will come in and they'll come in, they're just maybe the worst day of their life. And they come in and they're able to open up. And so they come back, and, because we're safe, we let it be, and we're accepting.
Yeah,
So they come back, and then over time, they recover, they feel better, and then they volunteer. So they'll ask if they can volunteer. And so we find something for them to do. And then so they volunteer with us. And then, and that obviously helps people heal.
absolutely.
They're helping other people. And then if we have an job opening, one of the volunteers is ready to work. And so we bring them on as a staff person. And, it's pretty special to watch somebody come in the worst day of their life, and then,
Yeah,
go through it and get the services and just be a part of it, and then to volunteer, and then to become a staff person. We pay for training, and sometimes they go on to work for a larger organization. And yeah, so
that's amazing
there's a
because you're
yeah,
you're given a place for people to go to. You've got your local, I don't want to call it chapter, but your local, right? Your local
yeah,
version of
yeah,
NAMI, but then you bring people in, help them, and then even allow them to move up and help others, which is fantastic. Using it from the group, like you said, who's better to help me with an issue than someone who's dealt with it before?
yeah. And every one of our staff members has lived experience with mental health challenges.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's amazing.
yeah. I'm fortunate to be there. It's a special place. And it's helped me. It's helped me, because I'm in a position to do something nice for somebody, help other people. And so obviously it's helped me heal
Yeah.
and be
And
the person
Dave, I
I
just
am.
got to say that's fantastic that, you working with that organization that helped you to now help other people, and even, using your comedy to help other people, and having comedy classes to take what you learned and to turn, that essentially turned your life around. And I know that once we have mental illness, generally we're always going to have it, right? It's not going to just go away. We've got to treat
Right,
it.
right.
But you're giving people an outlet to go and help them with this, and notice that there's other things out there than even just your traditional counseling and, your traditional, going to a psych ward for a week. You could try, this is another opportunity. Not only do you have the nonprofit, but you also have, your comedy classes where you're telling people to take these traumatic experiences and really kind of lighten up a little bit. Right.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
let's make fun of it a little bit. Let's have some fun with it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And we get people referred. You talk about the hospital, and we get people at the hospital. It's St. Vincent's is a big hospital out by us, and they've got people in the psych unit and intensive outpatient also. But they refer people as they come out and graduate or get out. They refer them to us at NAMI, and so they come in and start. And it's interesting. I hadn't thought about it till just now, but I was talking about, folks coming in as needing services and then volunteering and then working there. That's exactly my story. And
It
it's
is.
funny. I'd never thought about that
Yeah.
before.
You told your own story without knowing it. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
But hey,
Exactly.
that's great. Well, at least I could bring that to light for you today,
Yeah,
Dave.
thanks.
Or
I
you did it
really appreciate
yourself,
it.
but
Yeah. I
no,
see everything in a new light. Yeah.
no, it's fantastic though, because you're living the experience. You're not just talking the talk, but you've walked the walk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Taking one of the things that's helped me heal and helped me come out the other side is taking my hard times, my challenges, my darkest days, and using it to help other folks. And through the blog posts, through the books, through working NAMI and helping other people through the process, that's helped me a lot. I do have a kind of a rant though. I want to
Yeah.
I'm talking about NAMI and people with mental health experience, helping other folks with mental health experience. And then there's the social workers,
Hmm.
or the counselors and whatnot. Some of the counselors, and it happened, just an example, a couple of years ago, or about a year ago now, I got a call from a fellow that was in social work. And he asked me, "What do you think about the word crazy?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, is that negative or triggering or whatever?" And I just didn't know what to do with that. And then I thought
Hmm.
about it a bit, and I called him back the next day and I said, to think that someone with a mental illness is going to be triggered by the word crazy, is crazy. We're not
Yeah.
we're not weak, we're not vulnerable, we don't need protected. We've been through challenges, we're some of the strongest people. And
Absolutely.
people thinking that they've got to censor a word because it may trigger somebody with mental illness. Those are folks that are trying to be saviors.
Yeah.
When it happens, not all social workers, but too many, and counselors, they're there to save us, um, and we don't need saved. So don't try to protect us from words or being triggered. And when we do the comedy shows, I've only had one person, dozens of shows, and we tell our stories one joke at a time. And some of them are kind of raw, but there's always a good punchline going. I tell my
Hmm.
suicide joke, and it's my wife's favorite joke. And people, there's just a little pause, and then people break out in laughter because,
That's
like,
exactly how I
is it
was when you
okay?
told it. Because I was like, okay, we're doing a suicide joke, and I'm like, should I laugh? And then you told the
Exactly.
punchline, and I was like, I can't help but laugh.
Exactly.
you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Everybody's, it's been all positive. Nobody's ever said anything about, complaint about any of the material or anything, except for this one time. And this gal came up and said, "I'm not sure about, you should tell that suicide joke because somebody might be triggered." And I talked to her, and she was, ended up being a, counselor.
Hmm.
And I asked for, an example, and she didn't have any. But
Yeah, it's just a thought. Yeah, and I kind of agree with you. I've seen, because being former law enforcement, I've dealt with a lot of social workers and folks like that. And I was actually a crisis intervention
Wow.
team member.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
CIT, I was,
Yeah.
I knew I went through all the training, and
Yep.
so anytime we had someone in distress and I was working, I got those calls.
Yeah.
So I've
Definitely.
been there. I've been to, it's funny you said, I think, was it St. Vincent's your hospital is?
Yeah. Yeah.
Ours is St. Thomas. So it's like, I think all these old hospitals that were like Catholic hospitals somehow became
Yeah.
the mental health institutions.
I got to tell you my hospital joke. When, I was sitting on the couch and I was depressed, my wife finally came to me and said, okay, it's time. And I said, okay. And we got up and went to the car, and she took me to the hospital. And I was confused. I didn't know where I was. And I thought it was a hotel. And on the second day, I was talking to the psychiatrist, and he said, well, how's it going? And I said, not too bad, but the service here sucks. I ordered a margarita when I got here, and it still hasn't arrived yet. And he said, well, do you know where you are? And I said, I'm hoping St. Thomas. And he said, no, it's St. Vincent's.
That's funny. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, that's good. I
So
like
you
it,
got
Dave.
your St. Thomas. Yeah.
I did. I got it in there.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
awesome.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and so anyway, our jokes, the people that try to save us, stop it.
Yeah, we don't need
Stop it.
kick clubs,
Stop it.
right? I mean, we're just human beings. Just treat us like human beings.
Yep,
You know?
exactly. Exactly.
And that's what I say with everything in the country nowadays. When we talk politics and stuff, and everything's left and right, and you're either for me or against me. It's like, no, we need to stop all that junk, stop all that garbage. We're all human beings. Yeah, we might not agree on everything, which is fine, but I guarantee you, we're going to find way more in common than we have that's not in common.
Yeah, yeah, and I, with my experience with people wanting to censor words like
crazy
or that game last night was insane. Where you can't you can't say insane because it might trigger somebody, and I stop it. But one of my big things with the last election was there was a lot of censorship or words that we couldn't say and that type of thing that was going on. Same with COVID and other things, and so there was a censorship, and then one of my couple things that were important to me in the last election were the censorship, because I thought I knew if we kept going down that road, it was not good. I read I read 1984 when I was in school, and then I thought, well, that was an interesting book, great. And then I read it again about a year ago, and it was like, oh wow, I can really relate to that.
Exactly.
So, it's censoring words and censoring stuff. So that censorship thing was, and so after the election, it was interesting. I actually, I felt a sense of relief because we were going through that slippery slope. And
and it really was, you can't say this, you can't say that, or, oh, people get offended by that. And it's like, when I say something, obviously, most of the time, and Dave, you might be the same. When I say something, there's never an intention to offend somebody.
Yeah.
And if someone gets offended, that's kind of their problem.
It's their thing.
It's not my problem. I mean, I try not to offend, I try not to be a big jerk, walk around and make everybody mad. But on the other hand, if I have a belief, especially if you ask me about the belief and then you don't like what I say, that's on you. You asked me. I'm not going to lie to you.
Yeah, exactly. When I got to NAMI, one of the things that was going on is in the support groups, they wouldn't say the word trigger or suicide. If somebody wanted to talk about suicide or the topic came up, they did, stop and say, we don't talk about suicide because it may, be triggering to somebody else. And I got in there and I said, the person that, brings up suicide, and, that's the person that needs to talk about it. They've got something going on and they need to talk about it. So us shutting them down and saying, okay, you can't say the word suicide.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing. And don't worry about getting triggered. And culturally,
and if someone gets triggered, they're probably going to tell you too, right, Dave? I mean, if or you're going to see it, in their reaction and their facial response, you're going to know. And then you might say, okay, maybe I shouldn't say that at this particular point, but there's no need to tiptoe around it all the time.
Yeah, and exactly. And the person in the group, if they get triggered by somebody talking about suicide, then you're right, that's their issue. And what we do now is if somebody gets triggered by, and I hate the word trigger, but triggered by the word suicide or by something that's being said in the group or something, we suggest to them that they, take a break and, go for a walk. And we don't shut up the person that's talking, that brings it up or that says this, or, because it's not them, it's the person that's hearing it that gets
Yep.
triggered. They're the ones that have the issue.
And you know what? It brings up a good thing too, because if someone is in one of your groups or something and does get triggered, now there's an issue there that maybe we should talk about.
Exactly
Like,
right.
why did that trigger you? What,
Exactly.
it prompts those questions to go a little bit further and say, okay, I realize this triggered you, and out of respect, hopefully we don't want to do that again, but let's dive in and find out why that triggered you and
That's
see if we
exactly
can get
right.
into that problem. Yep.
That's exactly right. Yeah, your CIT is paying off. You could come with volunteer with NAMI and be a facilitator for one of our support groups.
Yeah, and my biggest thing is I've worked with folks that have had mental health issues for, like I said, 13 years of my career, and even longer as an EMT and as a 911 dispatcher,
Yeah,
and there's just like a special part in my heart, not only because, I have PTSD, but because I've worked with these people for so long, and I know that when they're at their best, they're fantastic people. And it's just the disease that we've got to try to treat and get them back to a sense of normalcy for them. But once they're, quote unquote normal, that's I always say in quote, because what the
sure,
hell is
sure.
normal, right, Dave?
But
But once they're
what
at
else are you
their
going to say?
normal
Yeah,
state, we're all the best people in the world,
yeah, just regular folks. And you talk
Exactly.
about it. You're a fellow traveler, and it's interesting. Over years and years, I don't know what, but I'm talking to somebody, and I can see it in their eyes. I can see the anxiety, if it's anxiety, or I can see the depression in the eye. I can recognize a fellow traveler because the eyes don't lie. It's in the eyes.
It is. You're right. You can tell so much from the eyes, especially after you get that experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
But you've got to be someone who's experienced that, because I'm sure you see somebody who's depressed. And one of the hardest things for me, and I spent so long pretending to be okay. And I knew people could look into my eyes and see that I wasn't, which was
I was the same
interesting.
way, Dave, with my PTSD, when that would come on, I would just, push it down and try to fight it and,
Mm-hmm.
say,
Mm-hmm.
no, 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 everything's fine. And then once I
Mm-hmm.
finally, went and actually saw help, I was like, why didn't I do this years ago? you know, I think we
Yeah.
all say that. Why didn't we do this years ago? We sit there and made it worse for ourselves just by not doing the easiest thing in
Yeah.
the world and asking for
Yeah.
help.
Yeah. That's something that pisses me off too, is right now, if I learn something new or realize that there's a life hack or whatever, it's like, shit, I should have figured that out 20 years ago.
Exactly.
Why
Yeah.
is it happening now?
I see those videos on the internet where it's like, I was today years old when I found out, and you're like, holy hell,
Yeah.
I didn't know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Well, when you were having, is the depression, does it recur? Was it a short period of time, or how's that?
It was a recurring time, like so when I transitioned out of police work
Hmm.
into, normal everyday, I work in IT now. When I
Okay.
transitioned, and that was very hard for me, because when I was a police officer, I felt like I was a part of something. I was part of a group, I was part of a brotherhood,
Yeah.
a sisterhood,
Yeah.
right? We would do anything for each other because in the end of the day, we want to go home to our families. And so we made sure we protected each other. And when I was gone, all those friendships just seemed to go with it. As I went on a different career path, they stayed on that path, and those friends were then gone. So that, that was a big hit to me, because that was a big part of my identity. I was a cop, I was a police officer, I was the community policing officer, I was the juvenile diversion officer, I was the CIT officer, so those were all parts of me that then all of a sudden were just gone. And I find myself out at a restaurant and like looking at the doors, counting how many people are there, making
Yeah.
sure I
Yeah.
have a
Yeah.
good exit strategy, and I'm like,
Yeah.
still now I've been out of it since 2020, the COVID years, because my mother-in-law moved. It was the last time I was in law enforcement itself, actually on the road. And, you know, I didn't realize that, that was going to be that much of a problem for me. I figured it'd just be like, you know what, this causes me more headache than anything. I was laid off from one cop job and then had to work several cop jobs to make ends meet. And I was like, why am I doing this to myself? But even now, what are we talking years later? I still have those little, inklings that do that. I'll still be driving in the car and see somebody do something illegal, go over and reach for my overhead lights, and I'm like, wait, I haven't done this for years.
great.
So it is. It's just funny how it sticks with you. But that's where the PTSD comes from too, And I was talking with a guest we had on yesterday who was a veteran, and we talked about PTSD. And I said, the average person in the United States, this is the United States, I just saw this stat the other day, has between 2 to 4 really traumatic experiences in their life. And that's just the average person. The average first responder, and that's firefighters, police officers, EMT, and even military, average 700 of those traumatic experiences within their lifetime. And it's like, so you could see why, suicide rates are higher in the military and with police and first responders than it may be with the general public. Yeah, that's obviously, I think almost anybody who works as a first responder probably has some type of PTSD,
Yeah, I can't imagine that. You've really gone through it and lived it. And, yeah, so
but
the
my
strength
biggest
that you've got
advice
to
is,
have.
yeah, get help, because trying to deal with it on your own does not help. It does not help at all.
No, it doesn't work. But I've got my second book, OMG, That's Me 3, is about the comedy classes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about the people five other people who took the comedy class and how it changed their lives. And the audiobook came out not too long ago. And in the audiobook, we were able to splice in their jokes from their live acts.
So that's awesome. So they can actually tell the jokes themselves.
Yeah, you hear them telling the jokes and the audience laughing. It's OMG, That's Me 3, and I need to rename it. And I'm thinking that I've got a book in my head, and talk about not getting stuck. I've been around a while, but I'm trying to figure out what my next career, and I've got some really good ideas. But the next book, Healing with Humor, and using the comedy because it does heal, but healing with humor, and it works for trauma, it works for PTSD. It's not just for folks with mental illness. I can't imagine you as a first responder, I can't imagine having all those experiences and having those inside you and how they, but if I was a paid professional and I was helping you by teaching you comedy, and you've got 700 of these traumatic experiences, I could charge you per experience.
Oh my goodness. Well. Yeah. I'd be out of money and you'd be rich.
Exactly. And then there's transference. So then maybe if we did it right, you could get rid of half of them and dump them on me. And then I'd be coming up jokes for myself to get your trauma out of my head.
Yeah, exactly. And, speaking of not trauma, but are you ready to lighten things up a little bit, Dave?
Definitely, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, please.
So you are going to be the first victim or participant, however you want to see it, of Dude Q&A lightning round. So I'm just going to ask you a few questions that I pre-wrote out. No overthinking, just simple answers, and we'll just go through these. I just thought this would be fun, lighten things up. But all right. So I figure this one would be a good one for you. Favorite comedian of all time?
Can't remember his name. He's a guy, curly head, sits down on stage and he just does one-liners. It'll come to me. But otherwise, Dave Chappelle. But all time, I mean, you got to be talking George Carlin. You got to be talking about some of these folks that, and it was before you had to, and too many comics these days. I know this lightning round and I'm getting off.
No, that's all right.
Too many comics these days, they're telling, they make statements and they're trying to make jokes, but they're making statements and they're looking for applause.
Yep. Or shock value, right?
Or shock value, dropping the F-bomb constantly. And that's not, for me, that's not comedy. I mean, George Carlin was, foul-mouthed and whatnot, but he was funny.
He was funny.
Stephen Wright was the other guy. Stephen Wright, he's great. If you can get any of his video, you'll just, you just laugh your head out. But, so, and, George Carlin, I mean, it was funny and he wasn't doing it to get applause. He was just doing it and he was telling stories and it was reality and you're connecting.
Yep.
And it's just laugh out loud, funny stuff.
That's awesome.
How was that? That was not very much lightning.
No, that's all right.
That was more like a thunderstorm.
That's okay.
We walked all through the weather there. Okay, what's the next one?
We'll just call it Dude Q&A. Get rid of the lightning.
No, I like the lightning round concept, though.
I like it. Yeah. So what's the weirdest thing you've laughed at during a low moment?
Weirdest, I gotta say my suicide joke. My suicide, when I
Yeah.
came up with that one, when that hit me, I've got another one, the happy hour joke. I was driving down the street the other day and I saw a sign out in front of this bar and it said happy hour. And I thought that's discriminating. They should also have a crappy hour for depressed people. And, and bipolar people could go to both.
Right.
Yeah, I used to drink often, and my wife thought I had a drinking problem, but I'd drink, and it was, I had this overwhelming anxiety, and so I'd drink, and just to get to a certain place where I wasn't overwhelmed with the anxiety. And then I got on the right medication for the anxiety, and I just stopped drinking. I didn't realize it. I didn't think about it. I just,
It was the same
stopped. I
thing for
didn't.
me. I was
Yeah,
trying to drown, my thoughts in the bottom of a bottle,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it never worked. And I haven't. It's been what, a year, almost a year and a half now since I've touched any type of liquor, which is, I can't tell you how much better I feel.
Yeah, I know.
We don't need a depressant to help us when we're depressed.
Exactly. And that's what happens.
It is exactly. They're just perpetuating the problem.
Yeah. So I didn't have a drinking problem. I had an anxiety problem. And
Exactly.
once that got taken care of, I just,
and I've got a
stopped.
buddy who is in Alcoholics Anonymous, and he always says that alcohol is never the problem. That's the solution to the problem we're trying to fix.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can see that.
Yeah, absolutely. You can. Definitely. All right. If you could have one superpower, Dave, what would it be?
To be invisible.
I would love that.
Yeah. Like I said before, I spent so much time pretending to be okay, and it was exhausting. I mean, it was just literally exhausting. And I knew people could look in my eye and see that I was pretending. And the mailbox is not far from our house, but I wouldn't go to the mailbox during the daytime because I was afraid I'd run into a neighbor or somebody, and they'd look
and didn't
in
want to
my
have
eyes.
to deal with talking or
they'd look in the eyes and see that vacant and see how broken I was. So I took to going to the mailbox at night. So if I could be invisible and go to the mailbox without anybody seeing me,
exactly.
or come home. Right now, I've got my wife, my daughter, my 3 grandkids, and a dog in our house. So if I could come home and be invisible and slip in the door and come upstairs and that'd be great.
Exactly. Get a little you time, right, Dave? Without
That's
anybody
exactly
knowing.
right.
You wouldn't have to feel guilty about it.
Yeah. No, I'd just be invisible.
Now, when you're writing, do you have a go-to snack for when you're on like a writing binge or something that can help you stay focused with writing?
I do a snack bar sometimes if I get hungry. But generally when I'm writing, I can write for about 3 hours at a time, and then I'm pretty much done. That's about it.
You got to take a break. And
yeah. But most writers can't write at home. It's just they need a different environment. So you talk to writers, and oftentimes they'll go places where they're at, some people go to a coffee shop, some people go, and for me, I go, Oregon wine country is just amazing. And some of the Pinot Noirs are world class, and the tasting rooms, great views and all that kind of stuff. And so when I was writing OMG, That's Me 3, I'd go out to a particular winery, sit on the deck with a glass of wine, computer, and just write and sit there and write for 3 hours.
There goes my next question, Dave. Paper or a computer? No.
Well, actually, I've thought that when I said computer, I thought that because, I write in my notebook first, and I always write in my notebook first, and I just write it out. It just comes from the brain into my hand and onto the paper. And what I do when I write on the computer is I correct as I go along. I edit as I go along.
Mm-hmm.
That's not, I can edit later. And, but writing it, and even if I write and then cross it out, that's fine. But it just flows from my head. And so, paper first. And
followed up by computer.
Then followed by the computer. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Last question.
Okay.
One word to describe your comedy style. That's a tough one.
Smart.
Smart.
I've had the reviews have been for what we do and for my comedy is it's smart, it's intelligent, it's creative. So it never, and then the last thing they say is it's really funny. But I think I'm proud of the fact that it's not a comedy has to be smart and the unexpected, the surprise. It can't be expected. You can't be telling a joke where everybody knows what the punchline's going to be.
Yeah.
So if you can do something smart and creative and whatnot, then, and so I'm most proud of that because it's really creative and it's smart and it's unique and, people love it. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
And you know what? I like some of the comedy too that makes you think a little bit, that gives you that
Yeah.
pause. Like your suicide joke, I was sitting there and I was like, oh, where's this going? And then you're like, there's more underneath the cabinet. And you're like, I like that.
Yeah. You have no idea where that one's going. I'm taking you down one path.
I didn't see that coming at all. Yeah.
Yeah. Taking you down one path and then all of a sudden you go
and
to
then we
another.
flipped it. But that's funny because my wife may say that to me one day. No.
Yeah. I know. Mine too.
Yeah, exactly.
Mine too. I'll have to check my pill bottle and make sure it's the right
exactly.
stuff. Yeah.
So Dave, with your comedy, have you done, I know you work a lot with folks that have mental illness, but have you done like any comedy shows or anything like that on your own or, done any open mic nights where you just go out and riff?
I've done a couple open mics, but it's interesting that, my humor is a lot of it's mental health humor. I've got other humor that I write. I should share some of that with you, but the internet lives forever, so I'm not sure. But I think your podcast may be the spot to tell you the joke. But if I'm doing my mental health humor, then, it's got to be, I've got to say that that's what it is. I've got to say that it's not making fun. It's say that it's okay to laugh and then go into it. And by the time you explain it all, it's like, it's over. And most
you're
people,
already done. Your time's up. Get off the stage.
Yeah. Your 3 minutes are up. I've told 2 jokes and people haven't laughed. And most open mic nights, the audience is other comics. And they'll sit
right, because they're there to do it too.
Yeah. They'll sit there with their arms folded saying, make me laugh. And it's like, so I don't need that. I can do shows and I know my jokes are funny and I know people laugh, so I don't need to go. But are you ready to hear a joke that I couldn't tell 6 months ago?
Yes.
Okay. You know how Target got in trouble for selling the tech-friendly swimsuits in the kids section? Yeah. And they pulled them. You can, little do, people know, but you can still buy a tech-friendly swimsuit at Target. But in order to wear it, you have to get a concealed carry permit.
I like that one. I like that.
As a policeman.
You knew it was going to hit right on me, right?
I did.
It is funny because, oh my goodness, conceal. Yeah. Now, do they have to, if they're in a car and a police officer pulls them over, do they have to let them know that they're concealing?
Exactly. You get pulled over and I get a concealed carry permit and I carry it where it's, you can see it if I'm doing. And so, the cop asks, I see your concealed carry permit. Do you have the gun in the car? So I can see that one. You got a concealed carry permit. Do you have a gun in the car? Well, I don't know what you call it.
It depends on how you classify that.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness, Dave, I love that.
You can share that. All my jokes are original, so you don't have to worry about stealing somebody else's jokes, and you're free to tell anything.
Yeah, that's a great one.
They legalized pot here in Oregon. We were one of the first ones to legalize marijuana. And shortly after that, we got a new airline. It's called Air Cannabis. And they don't charge you by how far you go, but how high you get. I know.
Oh, my goodness. I love that. See, these, like you said, they're smart jokes. Like it makes you think a little bit. How high? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And when I first started performing, first started doing shows, there'd be somebody in the audience. I was sitting there stone-faced. Everybody else is laughing, but this person here is just sitting there stone-faced. And I'd try to get them to laugh. So I'd be telling my jokes, I'd be looking at them, and I'd try to get them to laugh. That was when I first started. I don't do that anymore. Everybody else is laughing. I'm looking at the people that are laughing and having a good time with them.
Yeah, you don't want to be looking at the person in the eye and trying to make them laugh and they're just stone-faced, right?
Exactly. I don't let it bother me either. But that's what happens at open mic night too. It's like they don't want you to be too successful. They want to be the funniest one, so they're not necessarily going to laugh at your jokes. They don't want to
laugh you up, even though they're probably laughing inside.
Yeah.
I don't know how you can hold. I love the laugh, so I can't hold that in, but.
I know, me too. And I like a good smart. And that's where Stephen Wright, he sits there with these one-liners and it's like, where does that come from somebody's mind? It's just.
It is. Yeah, I love it. And the one-liners I love too, like who was Rodney Dangerfield? Yeah. I loved him for his one line, no respect.
Yeah. Yeah, for
You
sure.
know, do you talk to your wife after sex? It depends if she calls me. You know, those types
That's
of things,
great. That's great.
right?
Yeah, exactly. That's great.
But yeah, I can't take credit for that one. That one's definitely Rodney's all the way. But you
Yeah.
know, yeah, it is. Dave, I'm so glad that you came on the show. I loved learning about you and how you're using comedy to really heal, you know, mental health issues and make people more normal, more themselves, you know, through
Yeah.
comedy. And that's just
Yeah.
fantastic. And I want to be cognizant of your time. So is there anything else that you want to, you know, talk about or let the audience know about before we wrap it up?
Well, I just think one is the audiobook, and the audiobooks are selling better than the paperbacks now. If
Yeah, especially
OMG,
with the comedy routines in it. That's amazing.
yeah, it's been described, reviewed as brilliant, but it's also need to change the name of it. But anyway, the audiobook for OMG, that's me 3. The other thing I want to say is you're really good at what you do. This is you know,
Well, thank you.
I've been a guest on a lot of podcasts recently, and you're really, you're really good at what you do. So
Well, I
thank you for
appreciate
that.
that. Did my head just get bigger?
I think
'Cause
your
it feels like it.
earphones, yeah, your earphones
Are
expanded.
see, that's why they're
Yeah,
expanding,
they
so I
just
have
go,
room to grow.
yeah, that's right.
Exactly.
That's
But
right.
no, Dave, I'm so glad that you were on here. I really loved having you. I think we could probably do just a whole nother show just on your jokes. And
Yeah,
I actually
yeah.
wouldn't mind doing that. Dude, this has been awesome. Dave, you're a legend. Thanks for dropping all this wisdom and making us laugh along the way. We know our listeners can find your stuff on Amazon, and your website will be on justadudepodcast.com so that we can get everybody to look at your books, your audiobooks, and even read about some of your comedy. So, Dave, again, thank you so much for being here. Well, that's a wrap, folks. Big thanks to Dave Mowry for hanging out today. Seriously, man, you brought the heat with the laughs and the real talk. If you're digging what you heard, go grab Dave's books, OMG, That's Me, and OMG, That's Me 3. Links are available in the show notes, and maybe try cracking a joke next time life gets a little heavy. You're all legends for tuning in to Just a Dude podcast, and I can't thank you enough for joining us. If you vibed with this, hit that subscribe button, drop us a review. 5 stars, obviously. I'm kidding. But tell your crew to jump on board as well. Got your own OMG That's Me story? Slide into our DMs or emails because we want to hear about it and keep the conversation going. Until next time, keep it real, keep it chill, and we'll catch you on the next episode.